time, I'll call the July 9th, 2012 meeting of the Rutherford County Regional Planning Commission to order. If you will stand with me, please. Commissioner Veronica Buchanan will lead us in our prayer and our pledge.
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, Gail.
Rhonda Allen. Here. Richie Bolin. Here. Veronica Buchanan. Here. Will Jordan. Here. Mike Cush. Present. Craig Lynch. Here. Pettis Reed. Here. Steve Sandlin. Here. Mike Vaught. Here. Vincent Windrow. Jeff Phillips.
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you. I believe you have the Codes Department report in front of you. David could not be with us tonight. Take a minute to look that over, a few seconds, and then I'll entertain a motion. Do we have a motion? No. Motion to approve the Codes Department report and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That motion carries. I'm not. We don't have to do minutes tonight, right? No minutes tonight. Item 5, under withdrawn or deferred. I think if you'll remember, last item A is Brenda Benz and John Ingleson. Item 12A008, rezoning and conditional use permit. That's on Epps Mill Road and Manchester Pike. After a public hearing and some discussion last month, that item was deferred until this month at our request, I believe. And now the applicant has asked for a deferral, and that is taken off our agenda and will not be heard tonight. Anything to add, Doug?
No, sir. At this point, we're waiting to hear back from the applicant as far as another date for a potential neighborhood meeting in the area. That's really the big reason that this has been deferred for tonight, is the sides really couldn't agree on a date that would work before this meeting. So at this point, we're hoping to hear something in the next couple of weeks and then have the neighborhood meeting at that point.
So there's really not a date?
At this point, there's not, sir, no.
Item number 6, bond plat extensions. A, Lewis Downs, Section 1, Phase 2, bond extension for 1 year. Dale.
In this section, again, this is similar to our other ones we've considered. They've asked for a year's extension due to the economic situation. It appears that the economy is improving out there as far as the house sales, but we still need an extension, and I recommend we approve this extension.
This is the first time.
For this section and phase it is, yes.
Second.
Approve and second. Any questions? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. And that carries.
Mr. Chairman, back up on the Ms. Benz and them. So are we not having? We will not hear this until they have their community meeting or whatever.
That is correct. You know, when this was deferred, that was kind of the direction I think the Planning Commission wanted us to go. Right. So when it became apparent that they weren't going to be able to have that meeting before tonight, you know, especially with last week being a holiday week, there was a little trouble with that. At that point, I think they had decided, and after speaking with us, it might be a good idea to defer to voluntarily defer their application until they can do that. So at this point, I mean, I can't even say exactly if it'll be on August's meeting. A lot of it will depend on when that neighborhood meeting is held. So.
Okay, so we're not working on it or hearing it until that. And that's, I think the public, and I don't know how many's here for it, but just if they're watching, they'll know that. And then I think they're working maybe with some other issues also that was brought up at that meeting. So they're
I believe you're right. And like we do with any public hearing for rezoning or anything like that, we'll resend notices out for the next planning commission meeting. The neighborhood meeting is really more between the applicants and the property owners out there. So we make ourselves available to any of those meetings for technical assistance, those kind of things, questions, whatnot. But it's not really the county's meeting at that point. So the county doesn't advertise those. We leave that up to the applicant. But when that meeting is held and they decide they want to move forward back to the planning commission, we will resend notices and everything. So.
Clearing that up. Doug, when that meeting is held, it'll be advertised, and will we know about it, us as planning
Are you talking about the neighborhood meeting or the neighborhood meeting, it won't be advertised in the paper unless the applicants are the ones that do it. But I mean, it's a neighborhood meeting, so anybody who would like to come, I mean, would be more than welcome to go, I would think.
Advertise is probably not appropriate, but the word will be spread in that community.
Yes, yes. I mean, by the applicant, hopefully, and the people who that live out in the area. The applicants have been working with some of the owners of property out in that area. So a lot of it probably be word of mouth, I would guess. So.
Will we as a commission know about that meeting in case
we can?
To attend as well?
Sure. I mean, whenever we find out what it is, we can let you all know. Mm-hmm.
So to sum up, there will be a public hearing based on what's happening.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There'll be another night meeting.
I moved through that really quickly. Thank you, Steve, for bringing it back up. Any other questions on that deferred item? Okay. Item number 7, rezoning request and public hearings. Item number A, Montgomery Turner. Number 12A010, rezoning and conditional use permit. The location is Las Casas Pike. The county commissioner is Jack Black. The size of the site is approximately 5.67 acres. Tax map 61. Existing zoning is R15. Proposed zoning is for services, conditional use request, general retail trade, animal care and veterinarian services, consumer repair services, financial, consultative and administrative, general personal services, entertainment and amusement services, food and beverage services, food service, drive-in and drive-through, general business and communication service, and medical services. That's a mouthful. I think it's a Dollar General, but that's a mouthful. Doug or Ms. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there's several uses, and you'll see they're starting to use some of the nomenclature we will be using in our new zoning whenever it is adopted. So that's why you're seeing those fancy words. The applicant is proposing to build a shopping center anchored by a Dollar General with 2 additional shop spaces. The site is on Las Casas Pike, near Canesville Pike. It's approximately 5.67 acres in size. You should have a concept plan in front of you that shows the general layout, with the Dollar General being obviously the largest portion of the building and then 2 smaller shop spaces. The applicant has also provided us with the proposed front and side elevation of the building, which shows the front being entirely brick or masonry finish. Now, the surrounding area contains the Peachtree Nursery, the County Convenience Center, and several residential homes. The Rutherford County Comprehensive Plan shows this area as being part of the Las Casas Rural Center, which would recommend a mix of uses including commercial, office, institutional, and residential. Now, the Planning Commission may recognize this property. Actually, we did have a church site plan approved on this property in 2008 and then it renewed in 2011. However, it was never built, so the property is still vacant. They're looking to sell at this point. So just a quick look at the property. As I said, vacant currently. And of course, there's the Peachtree Nursery and the Convenience Center. And the applicant is present, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
all the property that the church has, or are they just selling off a portion and still want to build their church at some point in time?
This is the entire property.
Questions for staff before our public hearing? If not, I'll declare the public hearing open. Anyone wishes to speak for or against, or if the applicant is here and would like to come forward, may do so at this time. Evening.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the Planning Commission, I'm Monty Turner, the developer for the proposed project there on Highway 96 in Las Casas. And I'm not sure, my engineer, what happened to him tonight, but I'll be happy to answer general questions and attempt to answer any specific engineering questions you might have. We are proposing a 9,000 square foot Dollar General with two 1,200-foot shops adjacent to the anchored Dollar General. And we envision a sandwich shop and possibly another retail service, hair salon, nail salon, insurance, real estate office possibly, but most likely general retail.
Questions?
Sir.
Not at this time. You'll have your chance. Okay. Mr.
I'll go ahead and ask the $1 million question about a turn lane. Have you evaluated this site for turn lanes?
No, ma'am. We have not approached TDOT at this time. Over about 70 projects we've done in the state in Middle Tennessee, they typically don't, the traffic trips don't warrant, according to TDOT, a left-hand turn lane or a decel lane. They typically don't require those. But at this point, we have not completed a traffic study.
Questions?
Yes, sir. Right, 3 sides. Yes, sir. Metal rear.
Mr. Chairman, it looks like, based on staff comments, that as far as utilities go, we're okay with utilities. Looks like there's a 12-inch water main. They're going to do a septic system on site, correct? So I'm not going to speak for CUD, but from the notes that we were handed, it looks like the utilities are good. So.
Yeah, there's a drain field that's been approved. We'll have to pump up to it, but it's further back on the site for the septic system.
All right.
And then electric and water, I believe we're fine.
And a side question in terms of storm drainage. I see a potential stormwater detention area. Dell, do you know if there's actually a need for that, or are they under the requirement that far out?
They'll be under requirement on the new laws to do something there. They haven't designed it yet until they get the zoning in place.
So there will be some kind of a pond out front?
There'll be some type of treatment facility there, a pond or some device.
Commissioner Reed.
I know we've talked about the traffic as far as the Dollar General is there concerned, but is this not right across from the convenience center out there in that area?
Yes, sir. We've got
what is the traffic as far as the convenience center in that area? Then when you place the two together, is there a problem there? Has that been looked into as far as the two together? Because I do know convenience centers has a lot of traffic together. Then when you place the two businesses, as I call them, two businesses together, will that not cause some problem?
I'm not sure what the traffic generation is for the recycle center. I I think Peachtree is more of a headquarter type location for the landscaping company, but I'm not sure. Maybe the county has some trips per day that the recycle center generates. But the shopping center will typically generate about 25 to 30 cars per hour over a 10 to 12 hour stretch during the day. So on average, about one car every 2 to 3 minutes.
There's a lot of unused property at the rear, behind the building. Do you have any future plans for that, or have any idea what you do with it?
No future plans right now. Between us is some vacant land before we get from the rear of the center to the septic drain field. So, I'm not sure there would be enough usable septic drain field area to ever possibly replat. No plans at this time.
Doug, is there a general traffic flow study through there? Just what is the general?
Well, as far as just general traffic, we did see that there was a traffic count that was done by TDOT, 2011 count about a half mile to the northeast. There was about 4,662 vehicles per day. So that's, as far as any general traffic study or anything, we do have that TDOT count right through there. So.
Mr. Turner, on our rendering here shows a 3. Looks like with the Dollar General, you got 3 retail spaces on the side. You're promoting or requesting for 2. Is the size of the lot restricting you on that, or is it the septic itself system and the field, restricting you to that, or is it just what's
It has some to do with the width of the lot. I think we could possibly get 3 on there, but we want to provide enough green buffer on the sides.
Yeah.
And then just the general economy limiting my forecast really for the ability to lease up 3 shops.
Right. Okay.
Feel comfortable with 2, but not as much with 3, and the septic system.
Two or three things to point out. I live about a half mile away back further towards the west, and I've received probably 20 to 25 calls opposing this because there are some nice, the 2 lots to the west have pretty nice houses on them. In fact, the lot that joins it in the back has a very nice house on it. And to the traffic thing, McNolan is over the county convenience centers and the landfill. I believe I'm right when I say he has told me this is the second busiest one in the county. So it has a good bit of traffic. Peachtree across the road, they have turned out, they're good neighbors and all, but I think there's some regret that there wasn't some opposition there because of the lighting and that kind of stuff. I've heard several comments about that. Peachtree has, I think, about 90 employees, Chip told me. There are probably that many truck patterns in and out there a day. So it's a pretty busy thing. If you go by and all the employees' cars are there, you'll get a very good idea how many people work for them. So. Well, I'm saying I'm going to vote against it because there's a lot of community opposition, but I think there ought to. Well, I think the trash bins in this. Call Ernest and see what he says, I guess. All I was doing, Mike, was pointing out the obvious. And I'm in the area, so. Well, the trash thing goes back to the county commissioner, James Robert Ward, that was in the area, and they needed a location. And under that trash,
compactor is basically a flat rock, and he agreed to let them put it there for no rent for a long time. Then it changed owners, and the county's paid a small amount of rent then. Then it changed owners again, and you know, of course, the rent's up, but it's an evolutionary thing right there, and a necessary evil that everybody uses.
We've looked at enough of these. I should probably know the answer to this question by now. But how are your trucks going to load and unload? I don't really see a wide space for them in the parking lot.
They'll come in from the highway and turn to the left in between the parking aisles, and then back up to the right rear of the Dollar General building. That's where the loading and unloading area will be.
And they usually do that in non-peak hours, right?
Correct. And they have about one delivery per week with their big 18-wheelers.
Bill, I'm looking at the topography of the land, and it looks like that the that potential stormwater area is located near the front because that's the lowest part of the property. Is that right?
That's correct.
It might be aesthetically more pleasing to have it in the back. You can't make water flow uphill, so.
You can make it flow, but you have to do a lot of digging, and it'd be very expensive. So yeah, that would be the way to do it.
Rhonda, to your question, I believe the site plan on the church showed the retention area in the front right there, and that is the lowest area, and it'll probably flow into the ditch and then down to the creek from there.
Let everyone know we had a preliminary neighborhood meeting. It's probably been about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and wasn't a huge crowd, but we tried to get community input, and no one there, and we had direct adjacent neighbors. Well, the adjacent neighbor to the east was there and was not opposed, and then the gentleman, I can't remember his name, but 2 lots removed to the west was in attendance as well and was not opposed to the project. Really no one there was. Again, it was a small crowd, but we tried to have a neighborhood meeting out there.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Stay close. Want to allow this gentleman back here in the blue shirt, I believe, that I cut off, if the opportunity to speak. If you would come forward, please.
I'm sorry that I spoke up. He nodded and I thought he was asking to speak. He answered my question when the questions nodded.
Thank you. I apologize for cutting you off. Okay. Anyone else here wishes to speak for or against this rezoning? Anyone? Yes. Name and address, please.
My name is John Wilkinson. I represent the sellers. The current owners of the properties are 220 members of the North Bryant Baptist Church in Bryant, Arkansas. The land has been turned over to the sponsoring church. After about 5 years of giving it the best try we could, and we appreciate y'all approving twice our building for the church, it just was not feasible. We put the property up for sale. We appreciate Mr. Turner and Ms. Vincent offering what they could. We had a community meeting, like Mr. Turner said. Not only were the people there in favor, the neighbors seemed to be optimistic. One lady in particular said, "You can get a gallon of milk without going 8 miles." The Las Casas community has lost both of our eateries because of the recession. The only place you can get something to eat has got a gas pump in front of it. A sandwich shop out there, I believe, would be good for the community. Now, I know Mr. Vault has had, he says some phone calls. I have had repeated calls, like, when are they going to get that built? There's been a lot of people in the community that have expressed a lot of excitement about having some place to shop without driving all the way into Murfreesboro city limits. I believe the city limits of Murfreesboro are when you get to the next Dollar General store. This is a community of maybe 5,000 to 6,000 people, and other than the gas station, that's the only place you can really buy a gallon of milk. So there is a lot of excitement about it. I really think it'll be good for the community. It's unfortunate I hear some people are opposed to it, but I have heard a lot of people say it's a good thing. Realistically, I'm the managing broker for the Wilkinson Realty Group. I represent the sellers. Being directly across the street from that convenience center, I'm pretty good at what I do. I can't put a residential right there without the church taking a significant beating. The county does a good job of keeping it clean. We appreciate that, but it's still a convenience center. It's always going to look like a convenience center. And I believe the Dollar General store is going to look good in the area. I believe it's going to be used, and I believe it's, given the situation, a very good choice, and I appreciate you. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Wilkinson's comments. Some of the comments I've had and some of the opposition to it is because of the style of the front of the Dollar General store. If they had a porch on them, that kind of stuff, they looked a little better, looked a little more rural, looked a little more country. You know, if they put the downsized lights on it, I think that would help a lot. But, you know, and some of it's just the outward appearance. It has that commercial in-town look about it. And I think that's some of the opposition. And Mr. Turner's statement that the neighbor to the east, and now I talked to the neighbor to the east several times, and he and I are good friends. Unless he's changed his tune in the last 48 hours, he's opposed to it.
Anyone else wishes to speak? Seeing no one else, declare the public hearing closed, and we're open for discussion.
Doug, have you all had many phone calls at the office about this?
Honestly, no. I've received 2 phone calls. One actually happened a month before they even applied, and it was in favor. And then this morning I received a phone call of someone who I believe was in opposition. And that's it.
I've seen enough Dollar Generals that sometimes I feel like we think we already know the answers to some of these questions. I just want to be clear. There are regulations in place about the lighting and the amount of lighting, direction of lighting, and signs and all that. Do we need to go over all that, or have that, included in an approval should they get one?
A lot of that, those type of issues you're talking about, we generally see more at the site plan level. We try to encourage the applicants to have the lights that, the box type fixtures that point light down to avoid light spillover. I mean, there really is nothing in our zoning right now that says, you're permitted only this much foot candle at the property line or anything like that. We are looking at that in our new regulations. That is included, but currently we don't. But generally the applicants we talk to are willing to accommodate those kind of requests. So.
The photograph that we are seeing here, is this pretty much what it will look like with the rock and brick siding on it and pretty much like we have right here?
I believe so. That's what they're representing they want to construct, yes, sir.
Except for that it'll have 2 instead of 3. I know this one's showing 3 other businesses with it.
Right. Now, again, that's what they're representing. I have no doubt that that's what they'll do. We've worked with Mr. Turner on a number of these, and he's done what they said they would do. Now, that being said, I will also say that the county does not have any design regulations as far as, percent brick, masonry, or anything like that. That's certainly something that, the applicant can voluntarily do, but we can't necessarily require. So.
But considering he just said he was going to put masonry on 3 sides, we could make our approval contingent upon that, could we not? Since he is just, we're not asking him, but he's already offered to do that.
At this point, I believe you could, but again, I even if you didn't, I have no doubt that he would do what he said he would do. So.
Lascassas rural area or node that was showing up there earlier that had all this in purple, that is not proposed, that is current, is that not?
That is what was identified in the comprehensive plan, yes, sir. Now, understand that it's not a binding plan, and that's not a binding map by any means, but at the same time, that is what the recommendation was, and that's what the Planning Commission adopted April of last year, yes, sir.
Fairly included in that
yes, sir.
area.
It is.
And it is across the street from a commercial business as far as the Peachtree, and I tend to agree with the gentleman that spoke a minute ago. It would be hard to sell a lot directly across the street from the convenience center for somebody to build their dream home. So.
Ready to make a motion? Are you willing to accept one?
Ready.
I would. The fact is, this project does meet and is consistent with the land use. Is that correct?
That's our recommendation, yes, sir.
And it meets all the zoning requirements.
Again, that's based on our staff report. That's what we recommend, yes, sir.
Drainage has to be fine-tuned a little bit, but there is a proposed detention pond in front to carry excess stormwater so we're not flooding our neighbors. In addition, I see a 30-foot green buffer on the east and west sides of the property. So I'm going to make a motion to approve with any additional staff comments, which I don't really see there are any, other than, I'm sorry. Oh, and I would also like to include that based on the applicant's developer, that we insist on a front elevation and side elevations of brick as shown in the colored graphic that was presented to us.
Second. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposition? No. So noted, Mike. Thank you. Motion carries. Doug, you might note, just when the site plan comes back before us, that the lighting is something that we really want to take a look at too. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Item 8, staff reports, and I think we have a work session scheduled.
Yes, sir, we do. Just our continuation of our work sessions with the zoning ordinance draft. At the last meeting, you'll recall, we discussed primarily 2 items. We discussed the plan developments, and I think we pretty much got that one under wraps. It was recommended at that point that we change the 20% to 10%. So I think we've gotten that one taken care of. The other item had to do more with the regulations for mining, drilling, and quarrying setbacks. Just as a kind of a brief recap of what we've seen, you'll recall the original draft that you saw. Our current regulations require 1,500-foot setback from schools, churches, from churches, residential zone, probably those kind of things, and a mile radius from the schools. When we brought forth the original draft of the zoning document that is under consideration tonight, you'll recall that the distance requirements were substantially less than they are today. I believe 200 feet for the quarrying area and 100 feet for buildings. We changed that to, I believe, 500 feet and 200 feet at that time. After much discussion, it was determined just to leave things the way they were, 1,500 foot for, churches, residential zone property, those kind of things, and a mile for the school. Some further discussion we've had on that called into question whether or not we wanted to possibly look at the reduction of the 1,500 linear feet requirement or possibly leave schools out of the mile buffer area and just include them with the 1,500 foot. We did a report a month or 2 back regarding how other communities handled quarrying setbacks and distances, and presented that to you, presented you some scenarios as far as the amount of quarryable area based on our current regulations. You'll recall the test track we were using of about 620 acres or so. You'd have about 50 to 60 acres of actual quarryable area, and there was some discussion about possibly reducing that. At the conclusion of last meeting, we sent a memo out with our agenda kind of outlining the regulations as we understood the Planning Commission wanted, kind of left it at that point, and then decided they'd have some more discussion at tonight's meeting. We've presented with you tonight, or handed out to you tonight, a kind of a revised draft of that. It's essentially the same, but after meeting with our legal staff, they made some suggestions about some things to clarify the language. So we'll be going off of this tonight. This is a separate. Yeah, it's a separate sheet, not the one in your packet. It's a separate sheet that we handed out tonight. So we'll be going along. It's essentially, like I said, a lot of the distance requirements and everything are still the same, but some of the wording was different. Again, you'll notice our current draft regulations says no excavation, quarry wall, or storage area shall be located within 1 mile of any school site or 1,500 feet of any public rights-of-way, community assemblies, or residentially zoned property, including residential portions of approved plan developments. The proposed draft, you'll see we've kind of changed that, just the way we've set this up just a little bit. Our setbacks, and there was some discussion at the meeting, at our last work session, about when that measurement was taken, and we kind of clarified that here by saying at the time of application for a special exception, which is how quarries will be handled, no excavation area or quarry wall, we kind of clarified that a little bit, shall be located within 1 mile to the property line of any existing community education activity. This would include any kind of public or private primary, secondary school. 1,500 feet to the property line of any existing community assembly activity, which would include churches, existing healthcare activity, which could be hospitals, those type of activities, or residentially zoned properties, including residential portions of approved plan developments, and then 200 feet from any other property line, which would include public roads or rights-of-way and non-residentially zoned property to the extent not addressed elsewhere. And then nothing shall be stored at any time within 200 feet from any property line, with the exception of parking, and that should be a comma there, parking, fencing, offices, and weight scales, which shall be subject to all other requirements of this ordinance, which would mean other setbacks of the zoning district itself. So that's kind of what, as we left that meeting, this was our understanding of how we were leaving it for further discussion. We would also amend section 1408 G to say that the area that may be disturbed once all applicable setbacks have been applied, that deals with the site plan. Basically what we're saying there is that the site plan, when it's submitted, has to show which areas on the property could be disturbed. And then again, we talked about this prior. I don't think there's really any discussion that we need on this. As far as Appendix B, the land use activity table, we would allow mining, drilling, and quarrying activities as special exceptions in both the agricultural residential zone in addition to the heavy industrial zone. So those are the changes as we understood where the Planning Commission was at our last work session. Even at that time, there was some discussion that we would probably debate this a little further tonight regarding the distances. But that's, I think, how we left it. And so with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
I've got a question. Say we've got an existing quarry and somebody wants to do one of these activities within those perimeters. Do we turn them down?
I don't think you have to, no, sir. I mean, now understanding that just because, let's say you have one of these activities that goes within that buffer area, the quarry in and of itself doesn't have to stop operating. You know,
But it's grounds to turn down a quarry, but is it grounds to turn down a healthcare facility or something, vice versa, where they're within so many feet of an existing quarry or even a planned residential development? I mean, I just want to make sure we're not.
My personal opinion is that you're not, but I'll certainly defer to our legal staff.
Sorry about that. My understanding would be that that specific activity that would be applying would be governed by whatever applies to them. So this 1,500 feet really applies to what quarries have to abide by. So at the time of application, what you ask is, does the quarry comply with these specific regulations that apply to a quarry? Now, if it's a healthcare facility and those are subject to other regulations, the question is, does this apply? Does this meet the regulations for a healthcare facility? So the 1,500 feet doesn't really matter as far as the application is concerned for the healthcare facility, because the healthcare facility is governed by other regulations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, say you've got a quarry out there that's got some adjacent property they're going to expand in at some point in time, and a healthcare facility moves in, and all of a sudden, can they expand? You know, man, I'm just, and vice versa, you know, I mean, if it's good for the goose, is it good for the gander is what I'm wondering, you know, and there's a lot of fuzzy areas out there, I'm afraid.
And that's a very complicated question. There is this concept that a business that once it's come into existence and it's lawfully being operated, there is a right to a certain amount of expansion, the natural byproduct, the natural expansion of the business. Now, exactly what role that will play in this specific situation with a quarry, it's going to depend on a lot of facts. I can't sit here and tell you definitively, well, this fact, that changes things. But there is some conflict here with the natural expansion of businesses, because that is a right under the Tennessee statutes. But again, there would be things like, there would be constraints like the 1,500 feet. They're never going to be able to go beyond that 1,500 feet because that's going to be a condition of the approval.
Follow up, if a school found a piece of property, if the county found a piece of property that wanted to build a school on, and it was a half a mile from an existing quarry or some property that a quarry owned and was going to expand that operation at some point in time, they would be able to buy that and build.
Yes, sir, because it really is, the question is what is applicable to that proposed use of the property. It's not what's applicable to the other property. So it's the grandfathering technique that comes into existence.
They went in after the quarry was there and, you know, we're within these footage, then and something happens by chance. The foundation cracks on the school or the healthcare. Is the quarry liable then? More liable, maybe that's the question I'm asking.
But that is really complicated.
Less liable.
That becomes that's very complicated. There's an argument to be made that when someone is abiding by the zoning regulations, et cetera, that there's an argument that we're not responsible for this type of stuff. So that is a premise. But if they're operating the quarry in such a way as it's a nuisance or et cetera, that's a private cause of action. That would have nothing to do with Rutherford County. It would be an issue with the aggrieved property owner. Now, if it's a school, maybe it becomes a county issue as far as the aggrieved property owner is concerned. But the liability is dependent on a lot of facts, not just, hey, we've abided by the zoning regulations, we've abided by everything else, we're scot-free. That's not the way it works.
I'm not an attorney. I'll start off by saying that, but I've read it 4 or 5 times now, trying to let it soak in just what's in black and white. And this is a very touchy situation anyway, but I'm just saying under 2 here, setbacks. At the time of the application of a special excavation, exception, no excavation area or quarry wall shall be located within. Then 1 mile, probably I got that. 1,500 feet from the property line of the existing community, I got that. 200 feet from any other property line. I'm saying that quarry wall can't be within 200 feet. I know what you said at the beginning, and that's really for your area where you're putting your gravel or whatever, your rock that you've got, your storage area. But it actually doesn't say that, though.
Well, the 200 feet, that particular provision right there really is dealing with primarily if you have a piece of property that's surrounded by, let's say it's surrounded on 3 sides by residential zoning, but it's surrounded on the 4th side. On the 4th side, it's got commercial zoning. You know, where on the residential sides, you would have to be 1,500. That quarry wall would have to be 1,500 feet from those. It would only have to be 200 feet from that. The storage that you were referring to really is that last little paragraph there where it talks about nothing can be stored within 200 feet from any property line. So I guess I can kind of see what you're saying. The 200 feet is talking about storage areas as well. except for parking of vehicles, fencing, offices, those kind of things. But that third bullet point under number 2 there really is dealing more with the actual property line, especially if it's a non-residentially zoned piece of property or it's a public road or something to that effect. That's really what that third bullet point's addressing, not the storage specifically. That's really the next little paragraph.
Say it's 200 feet to a public road, and the public right-of-way is 100 feet, and on the other side, that's residentially zoned property. Then do you back up to the 1,500 feet? You're still 1,500 feet on all sides from any residentially zoned property.
Right.
Regardless of if there's a narrow sliver of commercial property, that's not an out.
Right.
Or
No, I
that's
think,
saying, yeah.
no, I would agree. I think that goes back under number 2 there, where it talks about residentially zoned property. Just because you have a 100-foot road, I mean, the road doesn't, you don't start from scratch after that.
It's
so
not like a break point
no,
there. That you
no,
still
sir, it's not.
You're still a minimum of 1,500 feet
Right.
to the boundary line
Yes, sir.
to any residentially zoned property regardless.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Doug, what's the logic in having a different amount of distance from commercial versus residential?
Well, I think the logic being residential homes as opposed to commercial businesses. Maybe commercial business have people coming and going all day. As far as activity, you see more intense activity with commercially zoned property than you would with residentially zoned homes. I think that's a lot of it. Plus, really with residentially zoned property, you've got people that obviously are sleeping and making their home at that property. You don't typically see that with residential or non-residential commercially zoned property. I would say that would be the logic behind that.
I guess it's part of what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is it safety? Is it quiet enjoyment? What's the reason for the difference is what I'm trying to reconcile in my mind, because then I have to reconcile it again with now it's 1 mile to the community education. So I guess basically I'm trying to prepare myself to have to defend each one of these numbers, and I'm not sure I can yet.
That's, I guess, why we're having the discussion today. So.
Could we not define that down to like something that's heavy industrial or commercial highway or something that's more of an, industrial type use? I don't have a problem with it being within the proximity of a truck terminal, but I do have a problem with it being in proximity to a Subway sandwich shop or something like that, and I would think that, or I would hope we could maybe pare that down to something that's a more aggressive industrial use, big truck traffic, things like that, but not the neighborhood
right.
commercial, something like that.
This is a draft at this point. If that's something you want to do, you're certainly welcome to do it. This isn't written in stone yet. Now, keep in mind our existing regulations that we currently have in our current zoning resolution. What we currently go by just has 1,500 feet from residentially zoned properties, churches, PRDs, those kind of things. There really isn't anything for commercial or industrial zoning at this point. That even currently we don't have that. Just as what we are proposing here is even different than what we currently have.
So the two differences then from the proposed and current are the fact that we've included existing community education, so we've allowed more education, the guides of different educational businesses under that umbrella. We've expanded that a little bit more for the 1 mile, right?
Are you talking from the current draft to the proposed? Well, no. If you look at the current draft, we are still saying that they cannot be located within 1 mile of a school site. So we've
right.
kind of clarified it a little bit, but
what we're doing is we're expanding the definition of a school site to include community
right.
education activity.
Right. We're using the language that's in the zoning
right.
ordinance draft. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other change, as I see it, is we're going from a 1,500 feet limit for non-residential to 200 feet. Right? So
right.
Those are the two big changes, is we've included more in the community schooling part, but we've actually reduced the, is that right? We've reduced the distances required to 200 feet?
Well, there really, at this point, under the current draft, there isn't one for non-residentially zoned property. Again, right now, that's actually increasing, because right now, under our current draft, we're saying 1,500 feet from public rights-of-way, community assemblies, or residentially zoned property, including residential portions of planned developments, but we stop it there. We don't say 200 feet from any other property line, for non-residentially zoned property, those kind of things. So it's a change, but it's more restrictive than current. I don't believe we classify them as that. I think we classify those as, what is it? Personal and group care facilities. That's a little bit different.
I think too, under definitions, we got to have excavation area defined and quarry wall defined for enforcement issues and being able to explain where that starts and where it ends, or where it begins and ends, or whatever you want to say, for codes as well as the people surrounding a quarry.
We can do that.
And I know we've talked about this, but refresh my memory. For instance, if we use the 1,500 feet, is that 1,500 feet to the property line, or is that 1,500 feet to the center of the building?
What we're proposing would be to the property line. If you look at the proposed draft regulations, under the current draft, it really doesn't specify, and we talked about that. That's something we needed to kind of nail down. Under the proposed draft regulations, we're proposing that to be measured from the quarry wall to the property line of any of those type activities, 1 mile to the property line of any existing community education, 1,500 feet to the property lines of those stated activities, and then 200 feet from any other property line.
Okay. And this regulation is for new quarries?
This is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
So
yes,
let me just ask a question. We have to have some kind of a guideline for a future quarry site to be able to find the right property that meets the county's requirements. So let's say this is the roadmap that we give with these 1,500 feet and 200 feet setbacks. So 3 years down the road, a company comes to us and says, man, we've got the perfect site. We're within 1,500 feet of a school and hospital and so forth, but man, this one little corner, we're supposed to be 200 and we're only 150. Can they come and petition us for a special exemption?
Well, what would happen is, let's just say they find that property that you're referring to, or it's a combination, they put several tracts together. Right. They would have to come to this body first for the zoning of the property. Now, quite frankly, we would probably recommend they look at an agricultural residential zone, AR zone, to do that. Right. Assuming that the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners approved that rezoning, they would still have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Now, at that point, if they're within those distance requirements, they would have to ask for a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. You wouldn't see it after the rezoning of the property. Now, the only time you'd see it after that is the site plan if it came to you. But once it goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals, they'd be going to them for the special exception. And if they did not meet all of the criteria that are ultimately adopted, they could ask for a variance. Now, variances are not something that are just granted. You have to be able to prove a hardship with that. So it would be up to the board's discretion at that point as to whether or not the application that applicant submitted met those variance criteria. And they would be the ones that made the determination as far as whether or not they were going to vary any of the setback lines.
But there is a potential for a owner/quarry company to request an amendment to these numbers. I mean, they can do that.
Do you mean as a variance or as possibly changing the actual regulation itself?
as a variance.
Yes, I mean, anybody pretty much has that
Okay.
right. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to grant it or that staff will be in favor of that. I mean, quite frankly, I dare say that as staff, we would probably be staunchly opposed to that.
Right.
But they can ask.
And here's what I'm thinking, and maybe this will benefit some of those who are still a little in question about the whole quarry thing. Originally, I was when we brought this up a year ago. I was all in the mood to actually be less stringent on distances. But the more I educated myself on quarry and drilling and the whole atmosphere that goes into quarrying, it's a complicated thing. And really the numbers that we're coming up with, the 1,500, the 200, that's just a crystal ball kind of a look. We really don't know because every site is different. Water table varies, the type of rock varies, if there's seams in the rock, if there's fractures in the rock. There are just so many things we don't know. I mean, as any state in the union that would have a quarry coming up. The distances we're putting on here are nothing more than a good guess or a recommendation. There's no scientific evidence, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'm okay with the proposed draft. I really am. They're actually more stringent than what I was going to argue about 4 or 5 months ago. But because of the homework that I've done and seeing what a big question mark the whole blast pressure can be, I'm okay with these distances, but as a guideline, like I said, as a roadmap for some potential quarry developer to have these guidelines going in looking for property or properties. But I'm not so sure I want to be so hard black and white that if he's 1,450 feet as opposed to 1,500, that he can't come back in 2 or 3 years from now and say, look, here's the perfect site. We meet all these requirements, but this 1 or 2, would you make an allowance? And I want that. I'm just asking if an applicant at that point has the ability to ask for an exemption for whatever you want to call it, to get some leeway on, pick a number, 50, 100 feet plus or minus. Because I'm telling you, there's no scientific evidence that we have put together that 1,500 is a magic number or 200 is a magic number. So I'm just asking. I'm okay with making a recommendation to approve these, but I just want to make sure that at some point in time, if somebody was close, it was a good site, if they could have some leeway on the rule.
Well, and I guess the quick answer to your question is they can always make an application to the Board of Zoning Appeals for relief. It won't be something that'll come to this body. It'll be something that'll go to the Board of Zoning Appeals as a variance request. Just as, and just my knee-jerk reaction to that, again, not knowing, just speaking generally, not about any specific particular application, obviously, but I think as staff, we would, again, be very opposed to that just because, applicant A comes in and it's 50 feet. All right. And BZA says, okay, yeah, we think you've got a hardship here. We'll give you 50 feet. Next one comes in, well, we need 75, 80 feet. Well, that's not a whole lot more than 50 feet. Right. Yeah, we'll go ahead and let you have that. Applicant C comes in. Of course, I'm assuming we're going to see this many, which we may not, but I'm going worst case scenario here. Applicant C comes in, 125, 150 feet. Next thing you know, a few more down the line, they're giving variances 300, 400 feet. At that point, I would just say we probably need to rewrite the regulation if there's going to get granting variances to it. Again, the quick answer to your question is, could they ask for relief to that particular provision? The Board of Zoning, they can petition the Board of Zoning Appeals to do that. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, then I'm going to throw this out to the Planning Commission. I'm okay with the 1 mile, the bullet point 1. I'm okay with bullet point 2, the 1,500 feet. But I kind of think 200 feet may be a little liberal. I think maybe it ought to be a little more than that. And that's what I'm looking for some help on.
What I was just taking a look at, you're 67 yards, so to speak, somewhere in there. That's a little more than half football field, lengthwise. And I'm thinking of an existing quarry site. I'm thinking of existing home sites that have issues. And they are storing area and everything else that they do, I guess you might say, is further than that, and their houses and their outbuildings and their trees is covered with dust. Covered. They have breathing issues, health issues, and all that is just, I mean, they can't go outside. They can't lift up their windows to get fresh air. Because it covers their house inside. And that's what I'm thinking about. And I'm trying not to think of existing problems, but you have to think of existing problems if you're properly planning. And that's what we're trying to do. So I don't know if we'll have a fail-safe, I don't think we will. It's not going to be a perfect anything that we do. It's going to grow, and we're going to have to tweak it as we go along and problems arise. But we try to make it as best as as we can with the issues that we've already seen for years since 1984, trying to put it back into a situation where we'll have fewer problems, within a zoning ordinance. So I do agree, though. I don't know what that magic number is, though, Mike. We just had the 1,500 in our original, and that was it. So
there's no real science to that.
I know there's not, because if the wind is coming out of north, south, east, or west, and your house is north, south, east, or west, and it's 500 feet. You're not talking about one load of gravel being dumped. You're talking about maybe an elevator at 100 feet tall or something dumping gravel out there, and the dust that goes along with it, and the wind is pushing it your way. You're going to get covered. I don't know how far it's going to go. I don't have the perfect answer, but I don't exactly like the 200. I do agree, and all I can do is argue about it right now. I'm not comfortable with that part. I'm good with bullet 1 and 2. I do believe. It's just that 200 is, I'm still reading it and trying to soak it in and trying to come up with something brilliant to say about it, and I can't. I'm just rambling here, so I'm not comfortable, I guess would be the thing I'd say.
Right, and I understand where you're all coming from, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear that right now we don't even have that in our current regulations, even in what we're currently operating under. This is actually, the 200 feet is actually more restrictive than what we are currently operating with. Right now they just have to meet the setbacks, whatever that zoning district is. So I mean, just so you all understand that.
All right, and I'm looking back at, Doug, a document that you sent us a month or so with various other Tennessee counties as well as southeastern states that had regulations already in place. And trust me, I am not trying to be like Williamson County or Knox County or anything. That is not on my radar screen. But Williamson County says all activities and structures shall be a minimum 200 feet setback from all property lines and 1,000 feet from all residential. Well, we're 1,500 feet at residential, so we're more stringent. Knox County says 100 feet from any residential, agricultural, commercial zone, 200 feet from a dwelling, so we're a whole lot more restrictive than Knox County. But as far as the 200 feet from a right-of-way, well, that's exactly what Knox County says. It says 200 feet from existing or proposed right-of-ways. I don't think Williamson County makes it clear, but I mean, 1,500 feet from residential, I'm okay with. A mile from schools or community education, I'm okay with. Can somebody help me with, is 200 okay? Do we need to go 300? Do we leave it like it is and vote on it?
Are you wanting I'm sorry, forgive me. Are you saying that 500 feet would apply to the commercial zones or the industrial zones?
Just change that. And I'm all right with 200 if we will include industrial and take any other property and just leave the commercial, maybe, and I went back here and tried to find the correct terminology for, RL or whatever.
Right. Well, it would just be industrially zoned. I mean, yeah, we could do that. Well, really, a lot of the numbers that you're seeing here, of course, the 1,500 was already there, and we have that. Right. The 200 is, I mean, we've seen that number in adjacent communities. Williamson County is being really the main one we looked at. Of course, not, we've seen other numbers all around. 200 feet, Kyle, Texas, looks like they use excavation blasting. It must be at least 200 feet from any property abutting a public street. Those are just numbers we've seen. I mean, and I agree with Mr. Cush. There's really no scientific number here. Yeah. I mean, that's just, again, that's some of the numbers that we've seen in surrounding communities.
All the numbers we use are subjective. 20,000 foot lots, they're not 19,900 foot lots, they're not 21,000 foot lots. A 35-foot setback isn't 34, it's not 36. You've got to pick a number at some point in time, and we may not be mathematicians or engineers for the most part, maybe an engineer or two in here, but I would propose that we leave the bullet point 1 and 2, make the bullet point 3 say 300 feet from industrial zoned property, and add another bullet point that says 1,000 feet from commercially zoned property. I'm just picking a number out of the sky right there, and that gets you away from the Dollar General and the subways a little more, and still a little bit farther, 300 feet from industrial zoned property. And if we need and I'll throw that out and see if anybody else seconds.
So 300 industrial and 1,000 residential and
1,500 would stay the same for residential.
Okay.
I'm throwing something out for the rest of the commercially zoned property.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
commercially zoned property hadn't been protected at all in the past.
Okay.
I believe. So we ought to have something for just all the rest of the commercially zoned property. So say 1,000 on that. On the commercially zoned property with 300 from industrially zoned property. The chance of all this coming into play is slim to none, when it comes to some of this property, because this property is basically going to be out in the rural parts of the counties, and there's not going to be much commercially or industrially zoned property around it anyway, but I'll throw that out anyway.
Would you include this non-residentially zoned instead of commercial?
Okay, yeah, 1,000 feet from non-residentially zoned property with 300 from industrial.
Yeah, if we're going to differentiate them, I would say take out the non-residentially zoned property, because that could be construed as a conflict, because industrial is non-residentially zoned. So if we're going to call out industrial zoning, then we should call out commercially or even institutional office, because we do have an office institutional type zone as well. So we should probably lump that in with the commercially zoned property as well.
Leave it to staff to work this out.
We can come up with the nitty-gritty details.
I think you realize I'm trying to get to a different level. Like I said before, a truck terminal or a heavy equipment operation can be within so many feet, but the subway or the sandwich shop cannot. And hopefully staff can figure out how to differentiate between the two.
We can do that.
So we do have a motion and a second to adopt the proposed draft, except adding a fourth bullet point that deals with commercial at 1,000 feet.
So 300 on it, though.
300.
So the bullet 3 goes from 200 to 300? Yeah. Okay, and a fourth bullet says 1,000 feet for non. Say that one more time.
If I can ask just for further clarification, and I understand where you're going with it, as far as the public roads and rights of way are concerned, do you want to leave that in the 300 feet where it currently is, or do you want that in 1,000 feet? I personally, I would think it'd make more sense there, but I just want to make sure we're perfectly clear before we bring back something to you.
I think the public roads thing and the property line of the 300 is acceptable.
Well, was your motion to adopt adding a fourth bullet, or was your motion to see another draft with a fourth bullet? Was your motion to adopt this, adding a fourth bullet, or was your motion to just see a draft version with a fourth bullet? Okay, so we're not voting to adopt, we're voting to see a revised version. Okay. Okay, thanks.
I'm okay with that, but I'll tell you, based on the information before us, this is one of the more stringent restrictions in the state, and I don't really have a problem with that.
Okay, so the motion is to come back at our next meeting, and
23rd, I believe?
July 23rd meeting, our 9 a.m. meeting, with a proposed draft.
We do
add a fourth bullet point.
Yeah, and yes, sir. And we do have a work session scheduled at that meeting as well, just for this reason. So. The 23rd, I believe.
July 23rd, 9 a.m.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And Steve, I think we're worried about the wrong thing. Where the quarry hole is, where the quarry is, where they're loading rocks, they're taking rock out. It's where they're crushing and where they're putting the pile. That's where your dust comes from. Is it not? Is it not?
Say that again. I didn't hear quite what you said.
They got the quarry hole. They're taking rock out. They're blasting. We're worried about that. Hercules can't throw a rock as far as these restrictions we've got right here. It's where they're crushing and it's where they're piling the rock. That's where your dust's coming from. You know, if they put this back in where they're quarrying, 200 feet is if the wind's blowing. That don't do much for dust, Steve. I'm sorry? For crushing? They usually bring that's usually outside the quarry wall. That's what I think we're worrying about the wrong thing. I mean, once they get the quarry, get a hole and get it started, they could crush down in it, which would be good for them. That would be the less dust. Your dust is what you're worried about.
Whatever happens, we talked at our last meeting, we need to do something. We've been talking about this for months and months and months, and we're doing it again. We're kind of getting hung up again, and that's fine and well. But at some point in time, we need to adopt something and move on. We haven't approved a quarry since I've been up here, since Steve has been up here, and we've been up here a long, long time. And who knows when the next one will even come up, and where any of this will even be pertinent at that particular point in time. What quarry would be proposed without major opposition? So the guidelines that we put together are just that, guidelines, and let's put this proposal together and hopefully be ready to move on it at our 23rd. And after you think about it, if there's some exceptions to that, we were actually ready to move the schools within 1,500 square feet, 1,500 feet, and of course Pettis had some safety issues with that, and we kind of changed our minds on that. So take a look at this, make sure that we're okay with it, and if you want to make some proposals, be prepared to make those proposals, changes to that proposal on the 23rd. You know what your assignment is, Doug?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Fourth bullet point, 1,000 feet from commercial and 300 feet from
industrial. And the public right, yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, anything else, Doug?
Well, I would like to discuss a meeting that we had with representatives from the Middle Tennessee Association of Realtors. A couple of weeks ago, I think it was the last week of, I'm trying to remember what exactly the date was. It's been just a couple of weeks ago now. We met with some representatives from, I'll just call them MTAR for short, Middle Tennessee Association of Realtors. It was myself, Ms. Emsley, and Chairman Phillips. Very productive meeting. Several good points we felt were brought up. They distributed a fairly lengthy letter, which I believe we sent out with your agenda packet. And they had brought up several different issues for us to consider while we were looking at the draft zoning ordinance. There were 9 different issues. I'd like to kind of go over the responses that we had proposed at this point. Now, you should have our responses to their comments on your tables. I'll try to be as brief as I can. A lot of these can take some time. The first issue they had in their letter, and hopefully everybody's got their letter with them, says the proposed zoning ordinance would cause a widespread downzoning, which would arguably be inconsistent with the stated policies of the Rutherford County Comprehensive Plan supporting private property rights. Now, our response to that was, while supporting property rights is a very important part of the plan's value statement, one of the goal statements is also to ensure growth policies that recognize land as a limited resource and that growth should occur where suitable land use and public services can be economically provided. And again, as we've said many times during this process, you know, any policy determination that like we're doing right now, any planning initiative that we're working on is really balancing the interests of several different groups. You know, you've got one side that would like to see, you know, conservation pretty much everywhere you go, 5-acre lot minimums. You have another side that would like to see us stay at R15. You know, a lot of what we do here in zoning and land use issues is really balancing all of those interests. We've attempted to do that with what we're working on here tonight. And identifying that we also understand that there are areas that are appropriate for higher density growth and some that are not. And that's really one of the reasons we came up with the proposal to zone a portion of the county to residential low density, RL. Now, responding to their concerns about the zone zoning in the more rural areas, you do recall that we did make some changes to the zoning draft regarding variable lot sizes. You know, depending on the availability of water and sewer, they can go as low as 15,000 square feet. So we do think that that's really alleviated a lot of the concerns that some of the people in the low density area had. But that was just an overview of a response to issue 1. Issue 2 had to deal with, adoption of the proposed zoning ordinance will cause some existing development to become nonconforming and may have a negative impact on redevelopment in the county. Our current zoning resolution contains regulations on nonconforming uses and structures, and lots for that matter, as do many other zoning ordinances in the country. Nonconforming uses, just by their nature, they're not compliant with existing zoning regulations. Many such uses currently exist in the county, you know, from the 1984 draft, or 1984 document and the document we're under right now, and they will continue to exist after the new regulations are adopted. And quite frankly, it's not something that you can really ever just completely eliminate. Really, with the scope of what we're proposing to do, the changes that we're making, we're going to have nonconforming uses. That's the whole reason we have that section in the document. While the eventual goal of this ordinance and many zoning ordinances like it is the gradual elimination of nonconforming uses, as Mr. Cawthorn stated earlier, regarding nonconforming uses, grandfathered uses, they do enjoy protection in both our zoning ordinance draft and state law, Tennessee Code Annotated 13.7-208, such as being allowed to prosper, continue, and expand. And quite frankly, the county is not going to engage in the elimination of nonconforming uses provided they remain in compliance with those regulations in Tennessee Code Annotated and our proposed Chapter 13. They did note several items of interest that they had, and I'll just kind of go over those. Continuation of nonconforming use if the use is changed. Basically, if a nonconforming use is changed to one that is conforming, that property loses all rights to the nonconforming use. That's currently how it's written in our document, and that's how we propose to be moving forward. If they go to a conforming use and they want to reestablish the use that was previously on the property, they would have to go through either the rezoning channels or the special exception channels. Again, that's no different than today. Abandonment of nonconformities, they had some concerns about that. That time frame of 30 months comes straight out of Tennessee Code Annotated. That is in state law. Expansion of nonconforming uses onto additional land. I think the draft that they were looking at was just a dated draft. We've actually changed the wording of that to clarify that. I believe that this, the language we currently have addresses their concerns. They had some concerns with specifically dealing with nonconforming uses. I think their concern really had more to do with if that also applied to nonconforming structures, which it does not. They're two different sections. However, we agreed that the change they proposed by just adding the word use at the end of the sentence where it says a nonconforming use that is changed or converted to a conforming use forfeits all nonconforming use protections. We added use in there offered by this ordinance. We don't feel that really changes anything, so we were happy to make that change. And the final thing that they asked for was an analysis of nonconforming lots. There's a chart on your table, or a series of charts on your tables before you. Kind of looks like this. Just kind of give you just a quick breakdown. In the RL zone, that first chart, I'm looking at the very top chart, in the RL zoning area as proposed, there are 6,197 parcels that are currently within the RL zone. 890 of them are under an acre, which is about 14%, a little over 14%. When you look at the acreages, again, you can see the total acreage of over 145,000 of those parcels. The total acres of the parcels that are less than an acre is 512%, and you can see that's only 0.35%. Now, moving on to the second chart, of those 890 parcels that are under an acre, 665 of them are classified as residential use based on the property assessor's data. So about 74, almost 75%. Again, that last line there is the acreage, kind of breaks down the acreage there. Of those 665, I was looking at, we had printed out a map that we don't have with us today, but we can certainly make that available to you. Most of those lots, a majority, I'd say about a little over 400 of those lots are in platted subdivisions that are in various parts of the county, primarily the northeast part around Las Casas and in the southwest quadrant of the county. Of those 400 lots, the vast majority of those are over a half an acre and are on septic tanks. Because of that, I don't feel that those are non-conforming anyway. Those would not be considered non-conforming because of that compromise that we came up with by saying if you're on a step system, and you can go down to 15,000 feet, if you have a septic tank, then you can go down to a half acre. If you don't have either, you have to be an acre. The vast majority of those 400 lots, there are a few that are under 22,000 square feet, but the vast majority of them I don't even feel would be non-conforming to begin with. So we're talking even a less percentage of that. You'll see that third chart down there, it says residential use. Again, 665 parcels that are residentially used, again, classified that based on the assessor's data. 59 of those 665 are also under 15,000 square feet, which means even if you left them zoned as 3 units an acre RM, they'd still be non-conforming. Again, and that they're non-conforming even today. So that just gives you just an idea that, again, you just cannot really eliminate non-conforming uses. They're going to be there. And then that last table just kind of breaks down the step systems and how many of those are within major subdivisions. That last, the third set of numbers there, parcels, 59 parcels under 15,000 square feet, residential parcels under 15 with a step system. Again, it just, basically, the analysis that we did really proved to us that I don't think the effect as far as non-conforming uses are going to be that great. Most of what we're dealing with here really deal more with non-conforming lots, not the use that's on the property. Quite frankly, the draft that we're looking at basically says as long as it's zoned for residential use, even if it doesn't meet that minimum requirement of an acre or 15,000 square feet, whatever it might be, you can still build a house, provided you are meeting the setbacks. And the setbacks are no different in the RL and the RM than they are currently. 40 feet for the front, 20 for the rear, 10 on the sides. So I really don't think the impact is going to be as large as, and I understand their concern. I think it's a valid concern. But I guess A, I don't think the impact's going to be as great as they might be afraid that it's going to be. And B, non-conforming uses are really just part of dealing with a zoning ordinance. They're going to be there no matter what we do. So I know that was kind of a short synopsis, probably not as short as you were hoping it would be. But moving on to issue 3, and of course if you have questions, feel free to ask. Although recently adopted comprehensive plan calls for the county to implement a transfer of development rights program for rural areas, the proposed zoning ordinance does not include such a program, and you see they have quite a bit of support for that concern that they have. Our basic response to that is the goal statements in the plan, of which development of a transfer development program is one of them. We rated those with a priority ranking of 1 to 3, 1 being actions that should be initiated in the near term, 2 being important but not critical to plan implementation, 3 being desirable items to be initiated as time and resources are available. In implementing a TDR program, we identified and it was adopted with a ranking of 3. We do feel that this is something that's worthy of further study, but we also realize trying to implement a plan like this while we're looking at the zoning would be very complicated. Quite frankly, that's something that we're probably going to have to, if we do decide to go forward with that, you'll have to get the municipalities on board with it. The time and the effort to go along with that right now, we just don't feel is there. We just would rather get the zoning done first. So that's the only reason you don't see that in there. Issue 4 has to deal with proposed traffic impact study requirements of section 1101 and also landscaping, screening, and buffering requirements. We did agree with one of the concerns they had that they felt that the traffic study could be required when our intent really wasn't to necessarily require one. So we did recommend the following change in section 1101. A zoning or land use change is requested that will result in a more intensive trip generating use, and then we added after that exceeds 100 peak hour vehicle trips per day as defined in the first section of that particular provision. And if you have your letter, you'll see it's broken down to A, B, C. So what we're talking about is changing B. So we agreed, again, that was not our intent, but clarifying that we feel is a good change. They also had some concerns about our landscape requirements in the draft zoning ordinance. They do state that they appear to be similar with what's in our current zoning resolution, which they are because we pretty much copied them verbatim into the new document while making some changes to them. We did have a subcommittee when we looked at changing our landscape regulations a few years back. You'll probably recall, again, it's been a few years now, but we had landscape architects, design engineers, ag extension office employees to help us with this. And really, as far as the regulations go, it seems that they've functioned well. Now, we have made a couple of changes to them. One of them had to deal with the requirement of when to require a registered landscape architect. You know, our current regulations are 12 or more parking spots required, new building exceeds 10,000 square feet in size, or an alternate method of compliance is being sought. And basically what we have done, we've made that change to a total floor area of all buildings exceeds 50,000 square feet, or the applicant seeking an alternative method of compliance. So, and that's something we agreed upon early on in the process, if you recall. Number 5 concern that they had to do with the conservation subdivisions. Quite frankly, with the compromise that was accepted by the Planning Commission regarding variable density in the RL zone, which we talked about in issue 1, we agree that the conservation design subdivision as currently written may no longer be effective. At this point, rather than trying to really hash that out, we just recommend it be removed and allow us to reevaluate that and bring it back before you, because we just feel that that could also, that could really kind of hang up us moving forward. So with that compromise that was brought up, we really need to reevaluate that conservation design subdivision and how we handle that. So at this point, we would just recommend we remove it, and we would come back at a later date after we've had a chance to see how everything functions. So that's our recommendation at this point. Item 6, administrative procedures in Chapter 14 do not include timeframes for the Board of Zoning Appeals to issue final decisions on administrative appeals, zoning variance applications, and special exception applications. Of course, it's difficult to know exactly how long or for how many meetings a particular issue is going to be considered by the board, but we do understand the need for some sort of a conclusion to the applications that are brought before them. So what we're proposing to do is that we recommend 90 days from the date an item is first considered by the board for a final decision to be made. Now, again, this just deals with the Board of Zoning Appeals. We'd further recommend that the provision be placed to allow an extension to the 90 days if requested by the applicant, or if the applicant does not object to an extension by the BZA. And we've put those, you see those bullet points on our response there. So we thought that was a good suggestion, and we moved forward with that. A procedure for determining minimum off-street parking is too vague. One of the issues they had was really concerning the ability of the planning director to determine parking standards for uses that aren't specifically listed in the parking chart, which is Appendix D of our draft zoning ordinance. Basically what they were saying was that it didn't appear that it said that their letter says it gives the planning director two methods for determining the minimum off-street parking requirement for certain uses, but provides no basis for choosing between them in a given case. After looking at the provision the way we had it, we kind of agreed that a little bit of rewording was necessary here. While two different methods are identified, we do feel that the provision will provide the developer an opportunity to state their case about how much parking is required for a use that's not identified under our new regulations. So while understanding where they're coming from, basically what we did was we made the proposed change in that particular paragraph where when it talks about the institute, either the American Planning Association or I'm going to the wrong part here. It says evaluate the proposed use based on the standards for the closest comparable use or by reference to standard parking resources published in the National Parking Association or the American Planning Association. Or, now what we've done is after that, it says, or the applicant, rather than say, or require the applicant to submit a parking demand study, we've changed that wording to say, or the applicant may submit a parking demand study. So really, that really gives the applicant a little more. If they want to submit the traffic study or the parking study to us, they can already do that. It's not a situation where, we're going to just say, well, this is what our decision is and we think it's final. We're going to give the applicant that opportunity to bring in their own data and say, okay, this is why we feel we need what we need. So we agreed with the change that they wanted to make there in Issue 7. Issue 8 had to deal with the criteria for determining minimum off-street parking lot design standards are too vague. Specifically, they were talking about minimum distance from adjoining, basically driveway locations and property lines, essentially, is what they're talking about. Minimum distance from intersection of street right-of-way lines on corner lots and driveway openings. Essentially, what we've proposed there is to be determined during site plan review or at the discretion of the engineering department. The first draft of our ordinance, we did have more specific provisions in there. Upon review by our county's engineering staff, and Mr. Corbett could probably speak more to this, it was determined that a one-size-fits-all approach may not be the best solution, so they asked for the ability to make that determination on a case-by-case basis. So that's why the language is the way it is. I understand MTAR's concern, and again, we explained a lot of these things to them as the meeting progressed, and it seemed like some of the issues, and I want to say this one was probably one of them, where when we explained to them why it was the way it was really just a situation where they just didn't know how the regulation came to be the way it was. And finally, Issue 9 has to deal with the requirement for building permit approval in Sections 1404. One of them deals with building permits, and Section 1404A actually deals with zoning compliance. They felt that those provisions appeared to be redundant, but when we explained to them how the process works for obtaining a building permit, it's really two parts of the same process. And I think when they left the meeting, they understood that, and I think we had addressed their concern in Issue 9. So I know that was kind of long-winded, and I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep with that, but I'll be happy to answer any questions. Again, we felt it was a very productive meeting that we had. We're very happy to be able to sit down with them in that kind of an environment and meet with them, and we do appreciate the comments that they've brought to us, and we feel that they've made several very relevant suggestions that we've taken into account in our draft. So I'll be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Good meeting, lasted a couple hours, very productive, very open-minded. Staff did a really good job being open-minded about it and making a couple of compromises that seemed really legitimate. And they were very receptive to explanations and what was going on. Their main concern was the downsizing, and we went through that with them again, and they seemed to be okay with that. Dave?
I had one question for Doug on the issue 5 there on. Tell me again when you. I know you're pulling it right now, but what do you? Don't you think we need to probably handle that before we get finalized or whatever?
Well, you're talking about the conservation subdivisions. Really, the compromise we came up with, quite frankly, the way that our current regulations are written, I honestly don't think anybody would go for that. I think if they had a step system, they would just go for what they could get out of the variable density allowances that we're making. Again, I just feel at this point to really sit down and give it the time that it needs to have. If we were to do that, we could be discussing that for several more months. And it's our recommendation at this point, not that we abandon the idea.
Right.
It's just our opinion at this point that the ordinance could be approved, move forward without it at this point, and allow staff more time and an opportunity to really sit down and look at it, especially in light of seeing how things would operate under the new ordinance. I just think we need more time rather than try to come up with something and try to get that through. I think we wouldn't be doing it justice to do that. I think we need to take more time on that.
Well, I want to ditto what our chairman had said. I appreciate you working hard with MTAR. This group has put a lot of time and effort in their thoughts, and a lot of folks and a lot of meetings there that they've had to put this together. And so appreciate you working hard with them, trying to
we're happy to
get
do
it together.
Doug, on issue number 3, it says down in the paragraph there, it says implementing a transfer of development rights program was given a priority ranking in number 3 in the plan. Now, did MTAR bring that up, or did y'all bring it up, or is that
Did MTAR write what up? I'm sorry.
Bring up? I assume all these these issues came from them. It says implementing a transfer of development rights program was given a priority ranking of number 3.
Right. Yeah, this document here that are the responses to MTAR comments, that came from that came from us.
I know, but
Yeah.
did they?
I'm sorry.
What did they ask for y'all to respond that way? I guess it's my question.
Well, they were. I think their concern. I see
What
you're
was
saying.
their
Yeah.
concern,
What was their
or did
concern?
they bring
Yeah.
it up, or did
Well, their concern was it wasn't in there, and they weren't. I think they were kind of curious to know why we didn't put it in there when it talked about it in the plan. I don't think they have a problem with it. I mean, based on looking at what they've submitted, they state that there's authority given in Tennessee Code Annotated to do a transfer development rights program. And I mean, it says right here in their letter, they support the adoption of such a program. And I think their concern was wondering why we didn't have it in there. And again, the reason being is it was identified as a longer-term goal, and something, again, that, quite frankly, we would probably have to get the municipalities on board to even attempt. So something like that, we could be talking for years about that.
Yeah, I was just interested in what their position was. They
get some
money
wasn't
off me every month. So.
Right? Yeah. No, it wasn't that they were opposed to it or anything. It was just right. They just wanted to know why it wasn't in there. Yes, they did. They did.
Other questions, Mike?
I have a question for our county attorney's office. Jeremy, have we heard of any date set yet to hear our appeal on the mosque readings?
That's not going to be set at any time in the near future. So the answer is no. There's a procedure that's going to be kind of going through where we got to get the record up there, and then there's going to be briefs that are due and all that kind of stuff, and there could be additional motion practice, et cetera, up there. So there's no set date for oral argument as far as I know of at this point.
So there's no timeline that they have to respond to based on our date of
There is a timeline, but I am not aware of the oral argument having been set at this point. But there is a timeline that is enacted, and I cannot remember off the top of my head what those specific time periods are at this point.
We'll at our next meeting in, what is it, July 23? Do you think we'll have any information?
I believe we could provide some better definition at the next meeting in July.
Okay.
I'll ask Josh to look into that. Mr. McCrary's been the one that's been mostly heading up that process at this time.
Well, I mean, is it unrealistic for us to think that something may be decided by pick a month, October?
That would be unrealistic. Given our experience at the appellate court level, it is a little bit difficult to predict how timely they are going to be, but it will range from 6 months to 15 months, and that's after oral argument. It's a fairly time-consuming process, so I cannot comment when they would come back. There is nothing specific in the appellate rules of procedure that require a decision at any given time. It's more of a discretionary type thing.
All right, and just to make sure I understand, this body at any time, should we choose to re-advertise the mosque with through adequate public advertisement, whatever the definition of that is, we can elect to do that as a body at any time to re-vote on the.
Yes, sir. That is accurate.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Our work session, we still will go forward with it on our July 23rd meeting. We'll once again talk about rock quarries and hopefully put that to bed. Our time frame is still kind of out there, what we talked about, and that time frame is somewhere on our August. I think it's August 13th, if I remember right. August 13th at 6 p.m. meeting. Schedule a public hearing on the new zoning ordinance, and we can either move on it that night or delay it till our next meeting. But right now, we're looking at next month, this meeting next month on August the 13th for a public hearing on our zoning ordinance. And once again, that might change depending on what we get into on our July 23rd meeting, okay? I'm probably missing something, but I have no other notes. Anything else to come before commission tonight? We have a motion to adjourn, and I'll take that motion. We're adjourned. Thank you.